Look, I know this isn't going to surprise most of you out there, but not every Jeep is created equal. And guess what? That is perfectly okay. Just take a look at the Wrangler. Yeah, it can go almost anywhere. It's not all that great to live with as a daily driver. So can the Compass go anywhere a Wrangler can? Not even close, even with this Trailhawk package. But for about the same price as the cheapest two-door Wrangler, you can get yourself a surprisingly capable Compass that's almost as good as any other little crossover the rest of the time. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Okay, let's clear this up right away. No, I don't think there's much cross-shopping going on with the Jeep Wrangler and the Jeep Compass. I don't think there's much cross-shopping going on with the Wrangler in general. It's the kind of vehicle that if you want it, you know you want it, and that's what you are going to get. But my point has more to do with pragmatism, which if you've watched my reviews, you know that's a big deal to me when it comes to shopping for a new vehicle. And if you take a look at the Wrangler, well, the secret is not all that great to drive. It's tippy, it's loud, it wanders like crazy. You can't drive it in a straight line. So if you want something that's kind of adventurous, but it means you don't have to make any sacrifices from Monday to Friday, that's where this Compass comes in. I really do think that's the benefit, because if you like to go out exploring on weekends, having a little bit of fun, maybe some backcountry camping, this can get you there. It's surprisingly capable for what it is. And the other thing is, it looks kind of cool too, especially in this Trailhawk trim I'm driving. Now, because the Cherokee also exists in the Jeep lineup, this is what I would describe as a tweener, a little smaller than your average compact crossover, including something like the Toyota RAV4 that leads the segment in sales. And you can really tell when you take a look in the cargo area. There's about 770 liters behind the back seats and a little less than 1,700 with them folded, so about 300 less than the RAV4 in both configurations. And even looking beyond the numbers, you can tell as soon as you peek behind the tailgate, it is a little tight. And the same goes with the second row, despite what the spec sheet says, because according to Jeep, there's actually more rear legroom in this thing than the Toyota RAV4, but in practice, that's just not the case. With the seat in my normal driving position, I can fit back there, but only barely, so it is a little tighter. One advantage this has, these doors open nice and wide, so whether you're getting in here yourself or you're reaching in to get your kid buckled into their car seat, super user-friendly. And that's the stuff that applies to every Compass, but what doesn't is just how great it looks. Well, that's not entirely true. I actually really like that kind of baby Grand Cherokee thing it has going on. I think this is the classiest looking little crossover on the market, but all the Trailhawk stuff really amps up the attitude. The same goes with the stuff you can't see, like all the skid plates underneath that help protect vital components out on the trail. The trail, that is where we are right now. And I remember driving this second-gen Compass back in, I think it was 2017, down in Texas, and we hit some pretty gnarly obstacles. I'm talking proper boulders, three-wheeling through deep ruts, all kinds of crazy stuff. We're not doing that today. This is the trail that I reviewed the Ford F-150 Tremor on not that long ago. Those of you who subscribe to the AutoTrader YouTube channel already know because you've seen it. It's a fairly challenging trail. I'd say the average Compass owner isn't doing anything like this, but that's kind of the point. Can it do it? Now, what you're getting with this Trailhawk version, aside from all these cool styling upgrades, are some proper drive modes for out here, as well as an upgraded transfer case and about an extra ½ inch of ground clearance, so 8.6 inches overall. We are on some kind of mud and sand, a nice mix. So I'm gonna go ahead, reach down here, flick it into this sand and mud mode, go figure. And in the gauge cluster, it tells me that it gives it aggressive shift points and it shuts off traction control, which is exactly what you want. You want to be able to have the wheels slip in case they start to get buried and stuck. But we are taking it pretty easy. There are some hill descents, which this thing has hill descent control. It's like off-road cruise control. It is pretty decked out. And with that transfer case, what it's doing, it's locked the four-wheel drive system. So when it's in automatic, it's going to go ahead and choose when to shuffle the torque to all four wheels and when to just channel it to the front ones. But with this, well, it's going to all four wheels no matter what, which is what you want out on the trail. And no surprise, this thing is very sure-footed. I even have to say this engine, not so bad out here. 2.4 liter four-cylinder gas engine. I would like to see a plug-in hybrid or something a little different here, but this thing isn't so bad in a low-speed environment like this. That is key. It does get a little buzzy going up some of these inclines, going over some of these obstacles. We're coming up to some pretty deep ruts here, and that stiffness out on the road, not so bad out here. You might be able to hear just a little bit of the skid plate scraping, but it's nothing to worry about. Again, it's nice to have that, and you know, it is pretty mellow. Easy to drive, nothing to worry about. I also like how compact it is. That's a big one for me because you don't want a big, huge vehicle if you're four-wheeling. Now, of course, this is a nice and wide open trail, but the point being you want something that's small because it's going to be tighter. That shorter wheelbase does come in handy, especially through ruts and stuff like that. You're not going to get hung up too bad, so that is nice. No, you're not going to Moab in this thing, but anything like this, not going to be a problem at all. When you're back out on the road, the first thing that's going to stand out is just how kind of firm and flat the ride is. And yes, part of it does have to do with this Trailhawk trim, the stilted suspension. It's a little beefier, but I drove a regular Compass, a non-Trailhawk trim, a couple years ago, and a lot of those traits were in that thing too. So it's just generally how this thing rides. It has a lot to do with the actual platform it's built on and less to do with the suspension itself. So you're going to notice potholes, pressure cracks, that kind of stuff going to stand out more than the average vehicle in this segment, something like the Toyota RAV4. And the same with the steering. It is just so lifeless. And I've talked about that in other vehicles before. And I just want to make it clear. No, I don't think this needs to have really aggressive, firm steering feel. That is for sports cars. But to me, any semblance of feel is very important because it means you can tell which direction the front wheels are pointing. And that's especially useful in an emergency situation. All of us here in Canada, we deal with black ice every winter, and that's something that you're going to want to know what's happening up front. And here, you just have no idea. Not to mention, there is a very big dead spot on center. A lot of play in this steering wheel. But on the positive, brake feel is fantastic. It responds to pressure exactly how you think it should. Very predictable in that way. And I do like that a lot. So that is one positive. But then the biggest negative, in my opinion anyways, has to be what's under the hood. This thing uses a 2.4 liter gas engine. And it is just so gutless. It's like a race to the bottom with the 2 liter from the Subaru Crosstrek, as well as the 2 liter in the Toyota Corolla Cross. And those are both smaller than this. So those smaller engines make a lot of sense. This normally would, I think it makes something like 177 horsepower, 172 pound-feet of torque, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it just feels very strained. Now around town, it's actually not terrible, but out on the highway, it is very, very scary when you pull out to pass. That's not something I normally note, but I really felt it when I picked this thing up the other day. I went to pass a truck, and there was a car, had to be more than a few hundred meters behind me in the left lane. So I pulled out, started to pass, and I just couldn't get up to speed quick enough. It was very unnerving. Not so crazy about that. The other thing that's not so great, fuel consumption. This thing's officially rated for 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers combined, which is a little more than a liter worse than an all-wheel drive version of the Toyota RAV4. Now, I have been doing a bit better than the official rating this week, but still not great. I'm still hovering right around that 9 liter per 100 kilometer mark, and I have been doing quite a bit of highway driving, so not ideal. I also do want to talk about the four-wheel drive system, as Jeep likes to call it, but it's probably more of an all-wheel drive system. And some of you might think that I'm just debating semantics here, but there is an important distinction. Now, the simple explanation of the difference between all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive is that four-wheel drive, well, it's a selectable system. You can actually choose between two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, whereas an all-wheel drive system, it's fully automatic. It decides to shuffle torque where it needs to and when it needs to do that, but otherwise you can't control which wheels are getting power the way you can with a four-wheel drive system. All-wheel drive, you can have different drive modes. You can adjust a little bit, but you can't choose to disconnect it altogether. That's kind of the general rule of thumb. And if you take a look here, well, this thing is labeled four-wheel drive because that's kind of the Jeep thing, right? It's a little bit more rugged, a little bit more versatile, but I don't think this is a four-wheel drive system because yes, you can engage four-wheel drive, you can lock it. There's also kind of low range gearing in this one I'm driving because it is the Trailhawk, but you can't disengage the system. It will disengage automatically. It'll cut power to the rear wheels when it doesn't need that extra traction. It'll just run in front wheel drive, but you can't fully disconnect the system. So to me, this is all-wheel drive in four-wheel drive clothing. Doesn't matter that much. You just saw it out on the trail. This thing is perfectly capable. I've done some pretty crazy stuff in the Compass in the past, so I'm not saying that it's a bad thing per se. It just is something worth pointing out. And then something else that's worth pointing out is this fantastic interior. Now, this is the biggest change point for 2022, and I've got to say, I do believe this is the nicest cabin in this segment. Looks great, nice mix of materials, little splash of color here on the dash, as well as the seats with that Trailhawk embroidery. Just looks really nice. I really do dig it. This big 10.1-inch touchscreen. It's got wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's got all the features you would want, including a heated and ventilated front seats, because this one I'm driving is the Elite trim, the Trailhawk Elite. So you get a few extras, including heated rear seats, and those are surprisingly rare in this segment, so the kids are gonna like that. But overall, I do really like the way this cabin looks. But my biggest issue in here, I noticed it the other day when I was out on the highway. Now, around town, it's not a problem, but even out here, we're on a nice country road, and I'll give you guys a listen. Now, it's like I always say with little issues like this. Could just be the one I'm testing, or it could be a bigger problem. But there's this really terrible wind noise generated right in the corner of this driver's side window. And as it has it, being a tall guy, it is right next to my ear. It has been a huge letdown all this week driving around. As soon as I get above about 80 kilometers an hour, it's all I can hear, even with the music on. Not so crazy about it. Anyways, that stood out to me. Otherwise, this cabin is great. This infotainment system is easy to use. You guys know the drill. Uconnect, it's very good, and this latest version just continues that. So let's talk dollars and cents. Now, the cheapest Compass you can get, it's about 32 grand before tax. And then if you want all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, whatever you want to call it, it's about 2,500 bucks more. And then the rest of the lineup, it's about $37,000 to $47,000 before tax, depending on the trim and options you want. Now, this one I'm driving, being that Trailhawk Elite, it does top out at about 45 grand, but then with this big sunroof, that pushes it to around 47. But it's got those extras. So as well as that sunroof, I've got surround view monitoring, the ventilated front seats to go with the heated front seats, heated steering wheel, and heated rear seats. There's also an upgraded stereo system that comes with that panoramic sunroof. So pretty cool stuff. But the cool thing is, if you do want to save yourself a little bit of money, you can get into the Trailhawk that isn't this Elite version for about 41 grand before tax. And that is very reasonable. That's about the same price as something like the Subaru Forester Wilderness, which is very similar to this in terms of it being like an off-road light kind of vehicle. And then if you're talking about the 45 grand or so for the Trailhawk, well, that's not too far off the Toyota RAV4 Trail with the TRD off-road package. And then if you take a look at the Ford Bronco Sport Badlands, well, that thing's about 48 grand before tax, but that's before any options. So this thing really does kind of fall into that meaty part of the competitive set. If you do want something adventurous, you can price this one out pretty competitively with most of its rivals, and it can go anywhere those can as well. Just might not be quite as comfortable on the road, but it's definitely got its own thing going. To recap, I like the classy and cool looks of the Jeep Compass, especially in this Trailhawk trim, and that it's actually pretty capable off the beaten path. I don't like the gutless engine, the lack of steering feel, or the annoying wind noise on the highway. For as capable as this thing is out on the trail, yes, even a mellow one like this, the bigger problem is off it. And let's be honest, that is most of the time, whether you're talking about a Jeep Compass or a Jeep Wrangler. The ride quality, not so great out on the pavement, and that gutless engine can be a little scary on the highway. But it's perfectly fine around town, and this thing has enough room inside that it would work even for a family with a couple young kids. I'm not here to pretend that the Compass is the best subcompact crossover out there, but not many others offer this same kind of capability when you need it without sacrificing the everyday usability when you don't.